112 points for Indiana. It is now at the stage where the way teams are defending Caitlin Clark is just not working. It's Portland kind of threw everything at Caitlin. They threw everything at Caitlin. And she still had a 26-point triple-double.
Indiana walked into Moda Center on a 5-game winning streak and walked out of Portland with a 6th. But the number that mattered more than the win total was the one attached to every game in that stretch. The Fever's 112-98 victory over the Portland Fire marked their 5th consecutive game scoring at least 100 points, the longest streak of its kind in WNBA history. That context matters more than any single highlight from the night because it means Portland wasn't dealing with a team playing above itself for one game. They were the latest opponent to run into a version of Indiana that has been operating at that level for weeks. The game itself did not start the way the final score suggests. Portland got out to an early lead, pushing it as high as 13 points before the Fever found their footing. A three-pointer from Megan DeLeo had put the Fire up 36-30, and for a stretch it looked like the sellout Portland crowd, a Fire record 19,959 in attendance, might get the statement win their inaugural season had been building toward. Indiana answered by closing the half on a run that flipped a 6-point deficit into a 56-47 lead at the break, with Caitlin Clark scoring 17 of her 26 points before halftime. Whatever momentum Portland had built in the first quarter was gone by the time the teams walked to the locker room. The third quarter is where the game was decided. Indiana outscored Portland in that period to take a 90-72 lead into the fourth, and Stephanie White pointed to that stretch specifically when asked what changed. She credited defensive execution rather than any single offensive adjustment, saying her team's defense was particularly good in the third quarter, and that it takes pressure off the offense when the team can get some easy baskets off stops. It was a measured explanation for a period that effectively ended Portland's chances, and it matched the tone White has struck through most of this stretch. Crediting the group rather than any individual set of plays, Clark's final line read 26 points, 10 rebounds, and 10 assists, her 4th career triple-double and her first of the 2026 season. She shot 5 of 9 from the field and made 14 of 17 free throws, adding 2 steals and a block while committing just 4 turnovers. What made the stat line unusual wasn't the scoring, it was the rebounding. All 10 of her boards came on the defensive end, and White said afterward that she didn't even realize Clark had reached a triple-double until the team was back in the locker room. She singled out defensive rebounding specifically as an area where Clark has kept improving, framing it as a skill that had quietly become part of her game rather than something that showed up in a single highlight reel possession. The triple-double also carried historical weight beyond the box score. It tied Clark with Sabrina Ionescu for 3rd most triple-doubles in WNBA history, and it gave her the most triple-doubles ever recorded by a guard in league history. For a player already operating under constant statistical scrutiny, it was another marker in a season that has increasingly been described in historical terms rather than simply strong ones. She wasn't alone in carrying the offense. Kelsey Mitchell matched Clark's total with 26 points of her own, extending a stretch in which she has topped double figures in scoring for extended stretches this season. 6 Fever players finished in double digits overall, a distribution that reflects how the offense has functioned during this 5-game run. It hasn't been a single star show. It has been a deep, fast-moving attack that has made it difficult for opposing defenses to settle on one answer. On the other side of the floor, Portland's defensive approach did not go as planned. The Fire's coaching staff, led by first-year head coach Alex Sarama, came into the game clearly intent on disrupting Clark in ball screen actions, but the defense struggled to execute traps against her in the pick and roll. That distinction matters. This wasn't a case of a defense executing a disciplined blitz scheme and simply getting outplayed by superior reads. Reporting on the game specifically noted that Portland's attempts to trap Clark in ball screen situations broke down, which is a different problem than facing a team that trapped well and still lost. It points to a young roster still working through the fundamentals of containing a player who forces multiple decisions on every possession. Sarama's presence on Portland's bench is itself part of the larger story of this expansion season. He arrived in Portland after serving as an assistant coach and director of player development for the Cleveland Cavaliers, making him part of a growing trend of WNBA franchises pulling head coaches directly from NBA staffs, following a path similar to Nate Tibbetts in Phoenix and Becky Hammon in Las Vegas. His hiring was announced in October of 2025, giving him a full offseason to build a system for a roster assembled largely through the expansion draft and free agency. Games like this one, against a team playing at Indiana's current level, are the ones that will define how quickly that system matures. For now, the gap between Portland's ambitions and its execution against elite ball screen offense was on full display. Portland wasn't without individual moments worth noting. The Fire got contributions across their roster in a losing effort, and the atmosphere at Moda Center reflected a fan base that has embraced the franchise's return to the league quickly, with the sellout crowd setting a new team attendance record in just the first season back. That part of the night belonged to Portland regardless of the final score. The basketball result did not. Indiana's win was not without its own complications. Aaliyah Boston picked up her second technical foul of the season during the game, a detail that added a secondary storyline to a night otherwise defined by Clark's numbers. It is the kind of detail that tends to draw attention less for what it says about a single game, and more for what it might mean if it becomes a pattern over the rest of the season, particularly for a team that has already dealt with officiating and discipline questions at multiple points this year. The Fever also arrived in Portland, carrying off-court noise that had nothing to do with basketball. Sophie Cunningham had sparked a wider debate following an ESPN interview in which she offered a pointed take on transgender athletes competing in women's sports, a comment that quickly spread across sports media and put additional attention on the Fever heading into the Portland game. White's approach, according to people around the team, was to keep the locker room focused strictly on basketball, while the front office managed the fallout separately. Whatever internal tension that situation created, it did not visibly affect Clark's production or the team's performance on the floor. If anything, the Fever looked like a group that had compartmentalized the distraction entirely. The reaction to Clark's night extended well beyond box scores and post-game quotes. Prominent national commentators weighed in almost immediately, with Skip Bayless describing Clark as becoming a problem for the rest of the league, framing her play as approaching MVP-level production, and calling her the engine behind what he described as a championship-caliber offense. Fan reaction across social platforms echoed that sentiment, with the general consensus being that Clark has entered an extended stretch of dominant, efficient play that has coincided almost exactly with Indiana's current winning streak. Whether that attention translates into formal MVP consideration remains to be seen, but the volume and consistency of that conversation has grown alongside the streak itself. Indiana improved to 19-10 on the season with the win, their 5th straight and their 9th in their last 11 games. That kind of stretch, sustained over nearly a month, is difficult to dismiss as a hot streak in the traditional sense. It reflects a team that has figured out its rotations, found consistent scoring from multiple sources, and developed enough defensive identity to close out third quarters the way Indiana did in Portland. White has been careful not to overstate where the team stands, describing the group as still a work in progress even in the middle of a run this good. That kind of restraint from a head coach in the middle of a 5-game win streak says something about how far she believes there still is to go, even as the results on paper suggest a team playing its best basketball of the season. The schedule does not slow down. Indiana was set to travel to Minnesota next, continuing a stretch of the season where nearly every opponent will be measuring itself against a version of the Fever that has looked, for weeks now, considerably different from the team that started the year. Portland, meanwhile, returns home to host Los Angeles, left to process a loss that exposed real gaps in its ability to defend elite ball screen offense, gaps that Sarama and his staff will need to close quickly if the Fire want to be competitive against the top of the Western Conference as their inaugural season continues. What happened in Portland on Friday night was in the end a fairly direct story. One team is playing at a historically productive offensive level, sustained over multiple games rather than a single outlier performance. One team is still building the infrastructure on the roster and on the sideline needed to slow that kind of offense down. Clark's triple-double will be the headline number, and it earned that position. But the deeper story of the night was the streak itself, 5 straight games over 100 points, a mark no team in WNBA history had reached before this Fever roster did it in the summer of 2026.